Welcome to the Genesis Science Report. I'm David Rives, and tonight we'll hear from paleontology expert Dr. Carl Werner as he uncovers how the scientific community misled the public by fabricating Ape Man fossils out of bones from barnyard animals. I'll also speak to a biochemistry expert as we look at new research that challenges prevailing theories on soft tissue preservation. But first, the biblical flood, as described in the Genesis account, presents a fascinating scenario that could have dramatically reshaped the Earth's landscape. The turbulent waters of the flood, which were said to have covered the entire Earth, caused significant geological changes, including erosion, sediment deposition, and the displacement of ecosystems. Now, these events not only altered the physical appearance of the planet, but also had profound implications for the fossil record. Many people enjoy marveling at the grand skeletal structures of dinosaurs, such as the T-Rex, or the remains of extinct megafauna like the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger. However, throughout history, approximately 95% of fossils that have ever been found, they're all marine organisms. Now, the first fossil I ever found was a crinoid, a type of sea creature. It looks something like this right here. And my colleagues will all concur, marine life is the most abundant type by far. But this raises the question, where did the vast array of terrestrial life go? During the flood, the immense volume of water, combined with the violent forces of nature, would have led to the rapid burial of living organisms, of animals, of plants. This process is actually crucial for fossilization, as it protects remains from decay or from some other animal scavenging it. However, this chaotic condition of the flood could also mean that many organisms, especially land creatures, were ripped apart. Many of them were scattered and not buried under the right circumstances to become fossils. According to the historical record, 150 days passed with intense flooding, a period likely characterized by earthquakes and scalding water due to pressure. Additionally, the mixing of sediments from various environments complicates the search for pre-flood land creatures. You see, as sediments from mountains, valleys, and other geological features were redistributed, the fossil record would have become jumbled, and it would be redistributed as well. So today, when you dig through strata, you're looking at a record of the order of deposition, typically the chronological order in which the animals were buried. But erosion, taking place at the same time, means that remains could have been scattered and then reburied only hours later. The biblical flood was not just a small deluge, but rather a monumental event, corroborated by the exaggerated myths of many ancient cultures. You see, the flood changed the world, and the world took note. The post-flood environment would have been starkly different from the pre-flood world, and the reshaped landscapes and altered ecosystems would have led to completely new habitats for all life. The implications for actually understanding these scientific issues helps us decipher the history of the world and the fossil record. And that's where science and history meet. And that's where the Genesis Science Report excels. Every week, we are systematically helping you understand complex issues and have quickly become the #1 science show that doesn't conform to the atheistic doctrine pushed by mainstream media. In a few short months, we have reached hundreds of thousands of viewers across terrestrial, social media, and YouTube viewership. Thanks for coming along on the journey and for being a loyal viewer. I'm David Rives, and this is the Genesis Science Report. Is there a biblical view of animal rights?
We've actually got a report that was in one of our British newspapers a little while back. Don't kill mosquitoes, let them take blood donation. Now here's a great example of being futile in your thinking, right?
Right.
At what point should we be looking after animals? At what point should we be treating animals as if they were humans? So it's a really popular topic.
On Wonders Without Number. I want to thank you for supporting GSN this year. Your support is helping us send this broadcast to millions of households around the globe. You know, in a society where the theories of Darwinian evolution are bombarding our youth via schools and universities and through peer pressure, we need to saturate the airwaves with the truth of real biblical science, and you are making this happen. Your one-time, monthly, or generous end-of-year tax-deductible love gift keeps this network streaming 24/7 at no cost to our viewers. Thank you for your support. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. You know, some people have said that you can't trust the Bible as real history because archaeologically we just simply don't find evidence for the characters written about in here.
We're going to delve into the world of biblical archaeology. Biblical archaeology is all of archaeology, because archaeology is the study of humans.
Right.
So biblical archaeology is the study of human beings from a biblical perspective.
On Wonders Without Number. And we're back. Let's get into this week's Q&A with a question from TJ on Facebook. He said it's pretty clear from Scripture that the earth was created first and then the universe. But yes, it took 6 days. My only unanswered question is, how old were the materials that God formed it from, seeing as time was not measured until the first day? TJ Lucas on Facebook. Thanks for the question, TJ. Let's break it down for a moment and see if we can better understand this. When you mentioned that it's pretty clear from Scripture that the earth was created first and then the universe, we look at the chronological record of the book of Genesis. It says that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters. So he starts to build out the earth, right? Then we fast forward to day 4, where it says that the sun, the moon, the stars were created to be for signs, for seasons, for days, for years, and to give light upon the earth. It's interesting that the first thing mentioned there were for signs, right? So even the celestial bodies are there to point to things that the Lord has done or will do. All right, so it is clear the earth comes first, then the celestial bodies, even though the space for those celestial bodies may have already been there. All right. The second part of the question, or the second part of your comment, says there's an unanswered question here. How old were the materials that God formed it from? Which is where we go back to the very first few words of Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1 states that in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The beginning was the origin of time itself. Of course, God is everywhere. God is outside of the universe. God created the universe, so therefore time really doesn't mean anything to Him. But what we understand is that God created time, what we see as time, in the beginning. And then He began to form the universe. He started forming the earth, started forming the stars, started forming sea creatures and mammals and humans and all of that over this 6-day period of time. Time was not measured until the first day, TJ, was your last comment. And time was not measured until the first day, but we have to understand that in the beginning was the start of day 1. It was the start of the beginning of the universe when time was recorded. And we read the evening and the morning were the first day. Well, the evening and the morning, Yom Echad, day 1, would indicate that all of the things mentioned on the first day took place immediately after the origin of time. This is referenced by Jesus in Matthew 25, because Jesus said, "Have ye not read that He which made them at the beginning made them male and female?" So He said that what happened at the beginning was directly associated with the origin of Adam and Eve in the beginning, right? So therefore, there couldn't be long periods of time from the very first words in the beginning to the creation of, let's just say, the universe, or the earth, or the origin of man, or any of it, it all was connected together in the same six-day event, meaning that we really do have good indications from Jesus Christ Himself as to how time is measured and when the beginning started and when the universe was made. Now, we love engaging with our viewers. We love tackling some of these more philosophical questions. We love tackling the scientific questions. So I want you to keep sending those in at comments@GenesisScienceNetwork.com. Now, if you found this week's Q&A fascinating, you will want to check out our featured resource, which is The 6 Days of Genesis by Paul Taylor. This book offers a verse-by-verse analysis of the creation account, tackling head-on the question, can we trust Genesis as a literal historical account of the world's beginnings? Taylor takes readers on a journey from the Garden of Eden through the fall to the Table of Nations, examining every step with meticulous detail. His systematic approach addresses common questions and objections to a literal interpretation, providing explanations rooted in his understanding of Scripture and science, but it really is a very biblical book, and I would encourage you to get this. The 6 Days of Genesis serves as a thought-provoking resource for those seeking to understand or defend a literal interpretation of the creation account. You know, in a time when many secular scientists argue against this view, Taylor's work provides a robust defense for biblical authority. You can order your copy of 6 Days of Genesis online by going to creationsuperstore.com. Welcome to the Kids Corner. Tonight we are exploring the fascinating world of fossils and how they help us understand Earth's history. You know, I started collecting fossils when I was about 8 years old, and I've been collecting them ever since. At first, I kept my collection in a small tackle box, but eventually it grew large enough that I needed more space. So I moved my collection to this large truck bed storage box, and I still have that box. It, along with the fossils and rocks that I collected starting at age 8, are now on display here at the Wonder Center and Science Museum, along with thousands upon thousands of other fossils and mineral specimens that have been added over the years. Now, some of my first fossils that I discovered in Middle Tennessee sparked my interest, and it would be things like this: crinoid stems, clams, brachiopods, and coral like we see right here. This is a good example of how coral throughout Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, looks like. But they're all bottom-dwelling sea creatures. Now, since I lived in Middle Tennessee, which is a fair distance from any ocean, well, I had to ask myself, well, why are all these sea creatures found here? But something else that I noticed is that fossils were often found in rock ledges that were in multiple flat, even layers. So the fossil clams that I found were usually tightly sealed, like this one that we just saw, and that indicated that they were buried alive. While they were still alive, they were buried and tightly packed under massive amounts of mud. So the fossil identification books that I had told me that these fossils were formed very slowly over millions upon millions of years as they were slowly covered with sediment. And none of this made any sense to me, because since this marine life would just rot away over eons of time, it wouldn't actually turn to stone. The answer, of course, comes from the Bible, as God's Word tells us that a great flood once covered the earth and buried many creatures alive in deep layers of sediment. Buried deeply and rapidly like this caused many of the creatures to be fossilized rather than just rotting away like we typically see in the oceans or on land. The repeated waves of water and sediment would form those flat layers like we see along highway road cuts, and some creatures would be washed away by the waves of water. So it makes sense to find fossils of sea creatures a very long distance from the ocean or even on mountaintops. When we look at the fossil evidence and we compare it to the statements of Scripture, we see that it all fits perfectly together. We can trust the Bible even when it speaks of incredible events like a worldwide flood. Now, after the break, we'll uncover a shocking revelation that challenges, or should I say, confirms, everything that you knew about the human evolution narrative. Dr. Carl Werner will join us to expose how farm animal bones were passed off as evidence for ape men. Just how deep does the deception go? Well, you'll have to stick around because we'll be right back. birds of the air. They were created by God in the beginning, but they are so diverse. Right now, he is being handed this magnificent creature.
This bird is designed. He is chock full of design. This doesn't just happen. He'll fly over your head and he'll land and you can't hear a thing.
Is that right?
It's incredible. God thought of everything when he made them.
On Wonders Without Number.
Join us at the Wonder Center and Science Museum for this month's Unwrapped event, where we feature expert speakers presenting scientific and biblical discoveries.
It pays to learn history, folks.
We cannot create an aircraft even close to what these birds can do.
This changes the way we do biology.
Discounted tickets are available for an after-hours adventure, including museum admission with kids' hands-on activities, a planetarium movie, Tesla experience, and pre-show entertainment. Perfect for the whole family.
What you believe about the history of the world is going to affect the way that you study the world today.
You see a mathematical order here. You see the orthogonal lines. You see the repeating patterns.
You don't understand what it takes to make a cell. That's serious engineering.
Come be inspired as you learn. The evening presentation is free, but seating is extremely limited, so RSVP immediately at wondercenter.org.
Limestone. We see it all around the world, but what is it exactly and how did it get here?
But let's delve a little bit into limestone. This was found by our good friend John Mackay, our mutual friend John Mackay, a few years back, right? He was driving through the Peak District and he shouted, "Stop!" And he said, "I've seen limestone." And the driver was like, "We're in the middle of the Peak District. It's all limestone around here." No, I found some special limestone.
On Wonders Without Number. Welcome back to The Report. On this segment, we are diving into a jaw-dropping revelation that undermines some of the most entrenched narratives in the study of human evolution. A new book has just hit the shelves, Untold Stories of Human Evolution, claiming to reveal a shocking truth that over 40 prominent evolution scientists use bones from barnyard animals to create the so-called ape men that we've all heard of. Yeah, you heard that right. Ordinary farm animal bones that are passed off as evidence for human evolution. Now, this is the kind of revelation that raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? I mean, how could such glaring mistakes have just slipped through the cracks of the scientific community? Well, our guest today is Dr. Carl Werner, author of Untold Stories of Human Evolution. Dr. Werner and his wife traveled the globe, more than 298,000 miles in all, investigating evolution and interviewing top scientists of the world at more than 100 museums and universities. Now, during these interviews, he stumbled upon this barnyard ape man story. Dr. Werner, this is an incredible story. You mentioned barnyard animals being used as evidence for human evolution. Can you give me a couple of examples of what we're talking about here?
A donkey skull being interpreted as an ape man skull. Now, by the way, that one's still on display in a museum in Spain. A horse toe bone being interpreted as an ape man collarbone. A pig tooth, a skull from the cow family, a bovid, being interpreted as an ape man skull. A dog leg bone, a cat hip bone, a raccoon leg bone. All of these bones were used to create ape men, and some of these were the most famous ape men in the world, including the ape man that appeared at the beginning of the show 2001: A Space Odyssey. That ape man was made up of dog, cat, bovid, and horse bones. Wow.
That's quite a combination. But we're not talking about just one discovery or one supposed discovery. You are talking about many of these different supposed ape men creatures from different scientists, studied by different experts in their field, and all of them are either overlooking something or they are piecing together barnyard animals or the like. I mean, it's one thing to make a mistake, but how many scientists are we talking about as a result of everything you've researched so far?
40 scientists created these, what I call barnyard ape men. And these were the top scientists of the Western world in Europe, Africa, North America, and South America. In Europe, it was Michael Cruciffont who founded, the famous Cruciffont Institute of Paleontology. In Africa, it was Raymond Dart who discovered the first Australopithecine. In North America, it was the president of the most prestigious science organization in the world, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And in South America, it was the founder of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of Cordoba and the president of the National Museum of Argentina. It was a who's who list that created these barnyard ape men.
Was it a giant conspiracy together, or if not, how in the world did all of these scientists end up being involved in so many missteps when it comes to anthropology and our supposed origins?
Well, each story is different, so you really need to read the stories in this book, Untold Stories. But fraud does go through all of these stories where you can document that they knew that they were misleading the public or their colleagues. And the other thing was this great desire to be recognized by their colleagues and also to get funding. But this desire to prove evolution, it's so great that they then, do acts of fraud to create their ape men.
Yeah, well, and we're talking about, again, acts of fraud. Some, of course, might have just misinterpreted bones, but when it comes to real acts of fraud, I mean, what kind of a scientific environment would perpetuate these types of either errors or outright fraud? It has to be tremendous peer pressure in their community, right?
There is tremendous peer pressure. For example, this is the Orsi Ape Man, and this is the donkey skull. This is a book in favor of the donkey skull, by the way, and this is the one that's still on display at the museum in Spain. 300 newspaper articles were written just the first year about this one. And, you do the Nebraska Ape Man, it received a full page coverage in the New York Times and the Illustrated London News. And of course, the one in 2001, A Space Odyssey, that story was covered in the New York Times month after month after month. And the one that was done down in South America using the raccoon leg bone, that is the most famous scientist in the world. In fact, they still recognize him as a great scientist. They gave him a crater on the moon named after him. And there's a museum library. It's like $2 million museum library in the National Museum named after him, the Florentino Ameghino National Library. And yet he made an ape man out of a raccoon leg bone. Yeah.
It's easy to understand how I could discover something or research something and maybe take it a little bit too far. But when it comes to completely creating creatures that then all of a sudden they start getting used in, whether it's a movie or 2001 A Space Odyssey, or it's in museums, they're reaching millions of people. At that point, it kind of becomes hard to withdraw. So it looks like they just continue to push, even though maybe they realize that there might be some considerations that they missed. But given the vast scale of these errors, how did these scientists justify their conclusions when they said this is proof of an ape-like heritage for humans?
These guys were famous, and very few had the intellect to challenge them. And they kept their fossils sometimes close at hand, not getting them out. And they also withhold the information. For example, the pig tooth. They knew when they announced the pig tooth as an ape man, they knew that the pig teeth looked like human teeth. They're withholding information. They're creating these narratives, and there's this desire to prove evolution. In fact, the one who did the 2001 A Space Odyssey with the dog, the cat, the cow, and the horse, he told his colleague this: never let the truth get in the way of a good story. That's a quote we have on camera. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So they were comfortable making up stories to create their ape men, to get to their ends, whether that's money, prestige, or recognition, whatever.
Now, you would think that science is going to correct for this, that if we're really following good science, somebody's going to see it, they're going to challenge it, and then they're going to completely reverse course. Was there any initial pushback from the scientific community when these misidentifications were finally realized, or did even most of their colleagues just sort of embrace it?
The pushback was soft, and generally they were all excited that they found the first ape man in North America, the first ape man in Spain, and the first, but they were excited that they had found an ape man. The pushback was never reported into the public. You could see it a little bit. Here's an article here, article there, but it's going like a train without brakes. It will not stop. And, the stories keep getting bigger, more and more press coverage. And eventually it gets called out. And then, but sometimes they don't even take it down. Like I say, the one in Orsi, Spain, it's still at the museum, and it's a donkey skull. Wow.
Still on display. Okay, again, 40 scientists. That's a lot in these barnyard ape men blunders. But as a group, how much credibility did these individuals hold within the scientific community if some are still on display in museums?
These scientists were the best of the best. They wrote, listen to this, 128 evolution books, and they authored 4,500 scientific articles. And as a group, these guys directed 13 museums, held 15 department chairmanships, and founded 14 evolution museums. So these were the leaders. At each time that they found one of these, they were the leaders. And that's what the leadership brought them to.
Okay, but did they learn from their mistakes, or did the same scientists come back and perpetuate it further and further and further down the line?
Well, like the pig tooth, once their objectives were met, which was to defeat the creationist William Jennings Bryan, then they acknowledged it. They had made a mistake. And the donkey skull, they were called out on it about 1 year into it. But the scientist who took over the lead of that fossil, Dr. Guibé, he went headlong, keep pushing it, even though his colleagues saying, hey, that's a donkey skull. And he keeps putting out articles and books and opening up museums and doing world tours, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't pull back necessarily. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the criticisms are late. And like the barnyard animals in the 2001, I was the one that first brought this to the public's attention last year because I got into the University of Witwatersrand and I got the catalog to see which bones were in it and then what they call them now. And that was a very stunning discovery.
I can only imagine. And lastly, Dr. Werner, when you went back and you looked at all of these instances of misidentification, did you see patterns or trends that kind of stood out to you?
Well, just the fact that there was fraud in all of these. And each scientist reveled in the attention they got when they, were announcing that they had found an ape man on their continent. So it's really the pride and the fraud were the two common themes in all of these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Carl Werner, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you, David. It's great to be with you.
Now, Carl's new book is a powerful refutation to the theory that humans evolved into apes. You can pick up your copy of volumes 3 and 4 of the Grand Experiment series from the Creation Superstore. That's creationsuperstore.com. And the entire 8-episode Grand Experiment video series is also available. It was filmed on location in Africa, in Europe, in Australia, in South America, actual interviews from these museums and from these experts. You can pick up all of these excellent resources today. Some of them are brand new. Go out, order them right now. You can find them at creationsuperstore.com or call 931-212-7990 to order right now. It's time for a quick break, but I want you to stay right here because we have plenty more coming up on the Genesis Science Report. Squids in limestone in the middle of the Grand Canyon.
But the big problem is, how did those fossils get deposited in the middle of a 7-foot thick layer? According to the narrative, is something like 36 million years in duration. I'm replacing the narrative with some type of rapid smothering event.
On Wonders Without Number. Friends of Genesis Science Network, we started this channel to make an impact in the lives of both Christians and inquiring skeptics around the world. It has done that in unbelievable ways. Now, one of our viewers wrote, "I've been watching your channel for nearly a week now, and I would like you to know the blessing that it's been to me. I've never had the finances or the opportunity to attend a university, but I've been a believer for the last 37 years. Your channel has done more for my understanding of my faith than any book I've read save the Bible, and I feel like I'm finally able to attend the lecture classes I've always wanted to. Thank you so much for your ministry." I want to thank you for your generous support. GSN is no simple project and requires monthly commitments to keep it on the air. Please consider becoming a partner with us today. Just call 931-212-7990 or click Give on our website. We are making a difference. I'm David Rives, and you're watching the Genesis Science Network. Welcome back to the report. We are kicking off this week's Viewer Voices with a comment from a user named Day on YouTube. They said, "Please keep these episodes coming. I love being able to watch a Bible-backed show, a Bible-backed science show. I'm learning so much, and truly, as you always state from Psalms, the heavens declare the glory of God." God bless you, brother. Thank you, Day, so much. We are excited. We are enthusiastic about this show. It's literally changing lives. So please keep watching. Our second submission comes from Stephanie, who recently visited the Wonders Center. She wrote, "This is literally the best place in Tennessee to take your kids for a super fun, real learning experience. My son said that it was better than Adventure Science Center, which he's loved going to for years." Thank you, Stephanie, for that. We really believe in taking things hands-on for the younger generation, for having the displays, the visual displays for your adults, and also for the intellectual crowd, having the science information that can additionally be read so that everyone gets something out of this experience, and it becomes a full-day opportunity for whoever comes to the museum. Now, you can share your experience with us on social media, or you can email us at comments@genesissciencenetwork.com. Now, we're looking at the amazing role plants play in sustaining life on Earth and how their origin points to a wise and intentional creator on this week's Genesis Science Minute. Let's take a look right now. Botanists estimate that there are over 300,000 species of plants. It's safe to say that we would be in big trouble without these plants, for the plants take our carbon dioxide and convert it into breathable oxygen. Plants help maintain our soil, which would erode and wash away without the intricate root structure. Plants provide most of our food, including corn, rice, potatoes, and vegetables containing essential nutrients that we as humans need to survive. Most evolutionists would insist that every plant we see today slowly morphed into its present form from prehistoric algae. But that takes blind faith. I believe that plants were formed in the beginning by an infinitely wise creator who placed beauty and function in all things. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.
For more information, visit David Rives Ministries at davidrives.com. davidrives.com.
You know, that's something not a lot of people talk about. We always are fascinated with the beautiful, cute animals, with all of the animal design, but plants are just as fascinating. And now for this week's ministry report. I run into so many fascinating people every day, whether it's on my travels, whether it's speaking at events, or here at the museum. I recently had the privilege of connecting with former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales at a function. Just the other day, we had a guest visiting the Wonder Center who was here all the way from Greece. And you know, there's just something special about meeting people from different parts of the world, how their stories and their perspectives enrich the work we do here. It was a reminder of just how far-reaching the message of hope and faith can be, and how many lives are touched by this ministry in ways that we don't always see. And speaking of new faces, we are thrilled to introduce our newest resident, Jack, the leopard gecko. Now, this incredible gecko right here is a little bit unlike the other geckos that most people are familiar with. You see, Jack has claws instead of sticky feet. This helps him hold on and hang out. But don't expect him to scale smooth surfaces like some of his cousins. You know, Jack's also a bit of a character. When it's time to eat, he'll wiggle his tail. A fun little behavior to signal that he's hungry. And unlike other geckos, Jack is actually pretty vocal. You might hear him making little chirps and squeaks. He's not shy at all. So native to the Middle East, Jack is a fascinating and friendly addition to our exhibit. And I want you to be sure to stop by and tell him hello. To stay up to date with everything that goes on in the ministry, be sure to connect with us on Facebook or on YouTube. You can also visit davidrivesministries.org to learn more about our mission and make a tax-deductible contribution. Thank you so much for your continued support and partnership in spreading God's Word with the world. Next, we're shifting to this week's Heavens Declare, where we will explore the amazing design of the leatherback sea turtle. With its unique features and extraordinary abilities, this ocean giant is a true marvel of creation. Let's take a look right now. What some paleontologists choose to believe seems to defy all logic. Let's take leatherback sea turtles as an example. They say that they remain unchanged since the age of the dinosaurs. Now I have to wonder, if I believed in evolution, and if I believed that the Earth had gone through radical changes over the past 66+ million years, and if I believed that these epochs of changes were so radical that dinosaurs and other groups of animals, including many ocean creatures, were completely wiped out, and if I believed that most every mammal, from the elephant to the hummingbird, had evolved over that time, well then why would I accept that sea turtles would survive all of that without changing in some way? I mean, 66 million years is a long time, guys. And by the way, sea turtles are not nearly the only survivors that exist in pretty much the same form as their fossil ancestors. I find it much easier to accept that these creatures were designed in the beginning to thrive in specific ecosystems and environments. Now, the icing on the cake of this fabulous story of sea turtle survival and so-called stasis is that today, these animals are threatened, seemingly by man, no less. So we're led to believe that they survived millions of years. We're talking about several mass extinctions, oceans of predators, including mosasaurs, megalodons, only to now be in danger? Now, there's no doubt that their numbers have decreased, and humans have played a role. In some Asian countries, sea turtle eggs, as well as the turtles themselves, are collected for food and medicine, or for their shells, actually. But many times, a turtle will accidentally swim into fishing nets or other gear. They'll get fatally injured. Commercial development on nesting beaches has probably affected them as well. We're not questioning the fact that we need to protect and nurture God's creation. The question is, how did they survive, unchanged, for tens of millions of years, only to be threatened in the last few hundred years? I mean, these leatherback turtles are actually very well designed by the God of the Bible, and they've been swimming in the oceans since Creation Week. They're massive. They're longer than a tall human. And if we look at the tough shell, which is how the species got its name, it's not like any other turtle. The shell of the leatherback turtle doesn't have any of these hard keratinized scutes, is what they're called. In fact, the shell is actually tough and rubbery, somewhat flexible, and it's lined with 5 longitudinal ridges. So the leatherback can actually dive more than 4 times the depth of other sea turtles, and its special shell helps to do this. The turtle can absorb nitrogen through its flexible shell, and those ridges that you see on the back, well, those aid in hydrodynamics. It makes the dives more energy efficient. So just like we would design a submarine or a yacht so that it was sleek in the water, well, those ridges on the shell also reduce drag while swimming, which is really good because the leatherback sea turtles, well, they swim amazing distances. Many of them migrate across the ocean to nest. And the western Pacific leatherback feeds off of the western coast of North America, ranging up into the Alaskan waters. But every 2 or 3 years, it journeys across the Pacific to the coasts of Indonesia, Malaysia. It'll go to Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Now that's an incredible journey, especially for an air-breathing animal. It's the greatest migration by far of any reptile. Now ever since I was 8 years old, I've marveled at the giant leatherback sea turtle, and I see the hand of the creator in their brilliant design and engineering. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. That was just a bit of a clip. It was a portion of some of the footage that we shot for an award-winning series called God's Living Treasures, Animals of Alaska, a 3-volume set produced in conjunction with Biblical Discipleship Ministries. You should definitely check it out and get your copy, whether digital download or on DVD today at thecreationsuperstore.com. Now, when we return, we will be joined by biochemistry expert Dr. Joe Deweese to discuss groundbreaking research on soft tissue preservation. Impact after the break. Hi, I'm David Rives, and I'm inviting you to visit the Creation Superstore, the largest origins-related store in the world. Not only will you find every book and video title on creation versus evolution, science, but also every resource that teaches us about our origin and how it all takes us back to Genesis, a grand designer, the God of the Bible, and ultimately, yes, the gospel message. Documentaries your family can trust, fossils, teaching videos, children's books, church Bible studies, homeschool supplements, and expert scientific literature. If you can't find a title, call us up and we'll add it. Normally, you'd have to visit dozens of sites to gain access to all of the titles that are out there, and then you would be at a loss to whether the book or video was worth the purchase. But not here. We've curated the best of the best into top 10 lists. And on some of my favorite products, you'll find the Rives rating, where I help guide you on the best resources available for not only those who love history, biblical studies, and creation science, but also great products at the layman level, easy to understand for those who are learning or want their children and grandchildren to be exposed to a biblical worldview. Just look for the Rives rating to find my personal favorites. Use the search bar to look up a topic or follow our menu to sort by ministry, subject, or author. Give us a call at 931-212-7990 as you're browsing. We have ministry volunteers who will do their best to assist you at all hours of the day and even help you place your order. Yes, a real person. Get ready for a secure shopping experience brought to you by the leaders of creation-based research. Your purchase goes towards ministry outreach and also supports the authors and organizations who publish the material, most of whom are personal friends and colleagues of mine. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Tonight on the Genesis Science Report, we examine a discovery that raises maybe more questions than it answers. A new study has revealed the preservation of human brains, which was unexpected considering some remains were thousands of years old. It is again shocking the scientific community with new data about soft tissue preservation and decay. This unprecedented find has researchers again scratching their heads when it comes to the presence of original organic matter. Joining us to discuss the science and the implications is Dr. Joe Deweese, professor of biochemistry and director of undergraduate research at Freed-Hardeman University. Dr. Deweese, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Good to be with you.
It is great to have you back again. So let's start with the basics. Can you explain why the preservation of soft tissues, especially brains, is so rare in the natural world, and how is this new study challenging what we previously thought about tissue preservation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Good to be back with you, David. As we think about what happens at death, really is what we're talking about here. So when just any organism dies, right? What typically happens? If you think about, let's just give the example, kind of crude, of roadkill, right? So what happens to an animal that dies on the side of the road? Well, obviously its body begins to decay, but then there's scavengers that come and tear it apart and take, parts of it and so forth. And so you really don't have much left there, right? Over time, it's going to get dragged away. It's going to get eaten. And there's also processes going on, though, within the organism itself where the tissues begin to break down themselves. While we're alive, our cells remain intact and functioning and keep at bay some of the enzymes and things that actually are designed to kind of break things down. And so once death occurs and those cells are in an organism that now is no longer living, energy flow slows down and comes to a halt. And ultimately, those cells will begin to destroy themselves and break things down. And that happens really across all tissues. So you just think about any organism that dies, it's going to break down over time, whether by, scavenging from creatures in the environment or itself, it's just going to naturally break down. And so forensic science, for instance, would study these processes to get some idea of how long has this body been dead? Well, we can look at the state of decomposition of the tissues to get some kind of timeline for, okay, here's how long this creature, has been dead. So that kind of gives you some sense of, timing, how long that this has been taking place.
Well,
so go ahead.
Yeah, well, Joe, I had to actually read it twice just to make sure that what I was reading was not the fossilized remains of brains, right? But then the more I'm reading through it, it's like, no, there are still soft, pliable tissues in here, which again is a staggering number of preserved brains, because they're talking about more than 4,000 that have been found, spanning continents. And so what are some of the most significant findings from this report, and why does the preservation of the brain stand out as opposed to, you shared a little bit, but as opposed to, let's just say, any other tissue that would be found in the human body?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you think about, so let's talk about what they did, and then we'll think about kind of why this is significant. So what the study did, and by the way, the research paper is out there and available. It's in what's called the Royal Society publications, what they call Proceedings B, which is a prestigious journal of the Royal Society of Science. And this particular one was published by a group from the University of Oxford. Okay, so this is not an obscure group here that's publishing this work. And so they're working at a really prestigious institution doing a big study. And the question they asked was, how common is it to find record of preserved brains in the scientific literature? And they actually went back in time pretty far, looking back in time as far as the records as old as the 17th century to identify where there was record of preserved brains. And they have dated these brains to be as old as 12,000 years old. That's obviously on a conventional dating timescale. And these 12,000-year-old brains we would probably look at as post-flood brains. But in general, they've dated these as, thousands of years old. Some of them were that old, some of them were much newer. But what was interesting was where they thought there would be, maybe a few hundred records of such of brains being preserved. They actually found about 4,400 records of these brains being preserved, and about a third of those, in about a third of the cases, the brain was the only tissue left, which is kind of interesting because, when we think about this from a modern forensic science perspective, the brain tends to start breaking down pretty quickly. There's a lot of enzymes in the neurons and cells of the brain, and as those die off, they release those enzymes, and those things can start breaking down the tissues. And so interestingly, these were preserved and held. So they say that it's about 20 times, there's about 20 times more than were previously known as far as ancient preserved brain soft tissue specimens. And so that's really interesting. I don't know how many of those still exist because what they did here is they actually looked through the literature databases, not necessarily try to find the individual brains, but found papers writing about those brains and cataloged that. And so that's kind of interesting to think about just from the perspective of now we've got 4,400 records of these preserved, soft tissues from brains. As you noted, the paper shows in one of the figures where they came from. And essentially you've got major representation in Europe, but you've also got representation in Asia, Africa, South America, North America. And so, places across the globe really represented in this study. So it's really interesting to think about where these different things came from, and then also to think about what state they were in. And so, for instance, some of them were frozen because they're up in far Arctic regions. And so you can understand how those might be preserved. Some of them were dehydrated. And so the dehydration may also have played a factor in preserving them. Others had undergone certain forms of preservation that involve modifications of the actual chemistry of the molecules in the brain. And some of that's natural, and some of that may have been brought on by actions of people who actually may have treated the individuals, embalmed them in some way. And so you got some combination of factors coming into the preservation of these brains. Some of it natural, like temperature or being in a very dry, arid climate, or frozen, and others were more chemical in nature and may have involved, intervention of people in those times.
You mentioned in some of the cases that the brain was the only soft tissue that was left. Most of the other material was decayed away, and that there are multiple preservation mechanisms like freezing or dehydration. But
right.
When it comes to when you're looking all the way back to Ice Age finds and still seeing soft tissue preservation, then it starts to bring up the idea of, well, of course we find mammoths or, smilodons, saber-toothed tigers that are very well preserved. But then you find some dinosaur remains with very well preserved original biomolecules. And one of the excuses given is iron preservation or something like that. Can high presences of iron really stretch things out over thousands of years? And if it can it stretch preservation of soft tissues out for 66 plus million years is the next question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there'll be a lot of research to kind of ask some of those questions. It certainly has, become a very hot topic in certain areas of science to really think about, okay, we're seeing more and more examples of these soft tissues being preserved across what has been presumed to be, like you said, not just thousands of years, but tens of millions of years or 100 million years or more. And so the question is, what mechanism could bring about such preservation over such deep time? Iron, things like this have been pointed to. They may offer some stability, but we really have no... how do you measure something that presumably happened across such vast time and do any tests in the current day to see if that would even happen in such deep time? So,
right.
At best we can extrapolate, and our extrapolations could be wildly inaccurate. So we have to be really careful about trying to take, observations that say, well, maybe iron, is sufficient. Well, It might be, but we don't know if it's sufficient across 100,000 or 1,000,000 or 100 million years. That kind of deep time, I don't think we really fathom how badly wrong our calculations could be, even if we're off by a small amount, right? So there is a lot of interest in this, and to be fair to our scientific colleagues who don't agree with our viewpoint, they're trying their best to explain these things in their model, in the context of their model, and I respect that. But I'm afraid that their methods over time, these are going to come up short, because the reality is, whether it's this soft tissue we're talking about with these brains, or if it's proteins and things that have been identified in ancient fossils, those things don't just last like that for long periods of time. I mean, Mary Schweitzer's work in the late 90s, early 2000s, and even up till relatively recent, was attacked by her colleagues who said, look, there's no way those things could happen, right? She has the famous video where they are stretching what appears to be a blood vessel, right, from T-Rex, and showing that it's pliable and stretchy. Well, how does that happen, across 65 million years, that remains enough intact to still be stretchy and pliable today?
It's challenging everything that most people thought they knew about the age of some of these things. It has incredible biblical implications, but more than that, Dr. Deweese, your research into this takes it even farther into sequencing some of these things that have been found, and I cannot wait to see where it leads. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things coming, and the reality is we have tools today that weren't available to us, even a decade ago. And some of these tools are opening up new doors that may allow us to ask questions about things that we thought were long lost, right? When I was in graduate school, the assumption was, anything in fossilized tissues, anything like that, it's long gone. There's going to be no DNA, no trace of that, no proteins. And a lot of that's been upended. And we have evidence not only of proteins, but of DNA. And if there's DNA, it could be potentially sequenced. And so there's some excitement there that some doors may open that we thought were closed.
I can't wait to have you back on. Thank you again. And that is it for today. I want to thank you for joining us on the Genesis Science Report. Until next week, keep looking up. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.